Hi there. I'm Smita Murthy, Managing Partner at Opencliff Partners. We're a product advisory and consulting firm. We provide product advisory and enable value creation throughout the product lifecycle for technology and tech-enabled businesses. We partner with investors and boards, founders and CEOs, product leaders and individuals, meeting them where they're at in the value creation process. This podcast series focuses on cross-functional perspectives on what it takes to build successful products across domains and industries. I interview leaders from various functions with whom I worked with to build and launch great products and the lessons we learned along the way. Today, I'm super excited to host Carl Wooten. Carl, thank you, first of all, for being on the show. Appreciate your time. Carl is a 25-year veteran of the life sciences industry, and he knows everybody in life sciences. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And he's the founder of Carl Wooten Consulting. He works with companies across pharma and the biotech ecosystem to help them access commercial teams, refine their go-to-market strategies, and accelerate growth. Carl's deep experience, expansive industry network, and I'm not kidding by that, and the hands-on support have helped emerging companies break into the pharma market and drive real results. Carl, so happy to have you on. I know we had some scheduling glitches, but I'm so excited that you're on today and appreciate your time very much.
Welcome. Very excited to be here. Thank you, Smitha.
Carl, let's start off by perhaps you can share a fun fact about you.
Well, I thought about this. I wasn't sure which one to share, but I will share with you that most people don't know this, but I am the proud, father of 9 generations of over 100 chickens who have laid countless eggs.
Wow.
I got into this situation when my 10-year-old daughter wanted to start her own business. She wanted to raise chickens, sell eggs to the local bed and breakfast, which she did. And she did a nice job, and we had fond memories of that. But after about 2 or 3 years, as they do, she lost interest. I think she really just got a better paying gig. Is the reality. But I was left with the chickens, and we have continued for almost 10 years now. So right now, I'm the proud father of 15 chickens, and you may even hear them during the podcast because they're out there.
Do you actually have them like in your backyard? Where are they housed?
Yep, they're in our backyard. We have 2 coops and 5 varieties of chickens, and they produce nearly when in season, which is typically spring through early fall. They'll produce upwards to a dozen eggs a day.
So are you still selling it to local diners, or what do you do?
We give them away vociferously. Our neighbors love us because when summer comes, they know they're going to have a dozen eggs show up on their doorstep, probably at least once a week. Yeah. So we have to give away. We have too many. The volume it gets pretty intense, and we're happy to give them away and share them with the neighbors, and they love them. They love the fresh eggs.
Yeah. Well, there's your protein for the day. Like, that's awesome. That's awesome. I don't think we've had that fun fact on this series ever. So you're definitely unique there, Carl.
Well, I would recommend them. I always say they're much more interesting than pigeons.
That's true. That's true. All right. Okay. So Carl and I worked together when we were at Axtria. So again, a life sciences focused data and AI company, built some great products while we were there, and a lot of our collaboration was in the go-to-market consulting services. That was our collaboration. So we can talk about that. We can talk about your other experiences, Carl. So let me get right into it. So tell me more about the role and function you were doing at Axtria when we met each other, and what you remember most about that interaction.
I was a global client partner. So my role was to obviously work with clients across multiple functions, typically the larger clients, and to keep them happy ostensibly, but to represent best I could the Axtria offerings, products that you built. So, and what I most remember about that experience, really 2 things, was how personable you were and your team in terms of your willingness to engage the client at any level at any time, which was fantastic. right? And frankly, and then building formidable products that mattered and made a difference and still make a difference today in
Yeah.
farming in terms of how they view data, one, and manage it and frankly optimize it. So that's my fond memories, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate that. I think we were building something really special there. And I definitely think back to Axtria, and I'm definitely watching from the sidelines now that I'm not with them anymore, to see, what else they're gonna be doing.
One thing I would say in terms of what you did, your team did, and obviously the leadership did well, was you took what was again considerably or viewed as a service offering, and you transformed that into a product hybrid service offering.
Yeah,
And so clients really got that, right? They understood the service model, but when you were able to marry up product and enable that service with the product, that was something special. And that's how I would delineate the value as it related to Axtria in the day. So nice job there. I think it was an
yeah.
effective approach to the market, and you made the clients think about it differently, and I think appropriately so.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, that was fun times. We created a customer advisory board. We had who's who of the pharma industry that participated in our quarterly meetings, gave us a lot of great feedback on our roadmap, and kind of directionally where we should be going. So it was all, that collaboration between all of these functions that enabled that, because the relationship was like a global client partner. You had the relationships,
Yeah.
right? And I had to work with you and others to make sure we reach the right people who could be on our customer advisory board.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I remember most as well. So tell me, and I know you have a good one here. Tell me about a B2B enterprise SaaS product that you've helped start, build, sell, grow, which I know you've done all of the above, you're fond of, and what made it special.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think about this often. But the example I want to give, and where I had, I think, the most learning, but the best time. It was a tremendous experience. I had just pivoted from pharma. I'd grown up in pharma. I was, sort of along that quintessential commercial pathway, and had done just about everything I wanted to do. I launched over 17 different brands, many of which were blockbuster, right? But there were componentry to the relationship and frankly to the capabilities that fascinated me in terms of if I could come up with something enabled through technology, a product or a platform to help farm, I'd be sort of satiated, right? I'd like to do something like that. So my wife says it's more like I lost my mind. So I pivoted one day. I left pharma and I literally started a product, a tech company on my garage. It's not a cliche. That's what I did. I cashed in everything. I had a vision, I had a thought, I had an idea, right? To build a product, a platform, a framework that could distill content. Now, let me stop right there. Company was Vertical Performance, by the way, but the sort of the hypothesis, if you will, was that at the time apps were just immersion. The app marketplace had just sort of come to the forefront. Pharma was now going all in on mobile, still very early and very much sort of not optimized. And they were trying to figure out ways to distill all that beautiful content, that rich content they had, into a digital experience for their decentralized workforce, right? So my vision was to take, and I always use the metaphor of 20, 25 years ago, you could build a website, but it would take you sometimes 3 to 6 months. It cost you $1 million, right? Today, you and I can go on and build a website for free in 5 minutes. I wanted to be that company that represented that capability in the life science market with applications, right? So we built a very large platform, a very complex platform product that allowed pharma companies to distill that content quickly into what we call thin apps and deploy those decentrally out onto the mobile devices. And when we started, it was the iTouch, then the iPhone, and then you may remember that thing called the iPad,
Yeah,
right? And the iPad we rode the wave of the iPad. Matter of fact, if you see behind me, that's Steve Jobs.
yeah,
Well,
I saw
so
that.
let me digress just for a fun fact about that company. I had pre-ordered 650 iPads because we're going to take advantage of that real estate, that technology, right?
Yeah,
And use it with our product, with our software, and deploy that. And when I pre-ordered 650, I get an email one day that says, I'd like to understand, at a better level as to what you're doing with 650 of my iPads, Steve.
Oh, did you really?
I promise you. And I said, I go, and of course I'm panicking, and I wrote, is this Steve Jobs? And he said, yes, this is Steve Jobs. And like a 12-year-old, I said, no, it's not. And he said, yes, it is, Steve. I'd like to know what you're doing with our iPads. So I proceeded to tell him as to what I was doing. And I said, I know you're consumer focused, but I think you really should look at this market called life science. They're engaged in this. There's a high level of interest. We're going to deploy these things wholesale across the planet. We should do a partnership. And his last email to me, Smith, I think it was something like, I'm not giving you my iPads for free.
He's like, if you want to buy the 650, you may.
Well, he was afraid I was buying them and reselling them somewhere, right? That was his concern, was why would a consumer, right?
Yeah.
If he was consumer focused, want 650 iPads. When I explained there was a B2B opportunity, he was less interested. Now, I stand correct. I stand here today to say I was right, because pharma went all in on the iPad.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, like, that's kind of like the default right now for most pharma field representatives. They're armed with an iPad. It's like everything now with AI and everything. Maybe we can talk about that for a little bit, where, how is AI, Gen AI, agentic AI changing the landscape of life sciences and pharma? I'm sure you see this all the time with the work that you do.
Yeah, and again, it's a little bit of digression. We'll go back to vertical, but I can tell you this, that the fundamental question, it's really two questions, right? Is it safe, right? That's the primary concern, is that once we sort of inculcate this into the fabric of the organization, do we lose control, and do we put our organization and our patients at risk? So that's priority one, is to do no harm, right? Two, and this is a very interesting concept, is that there is sort of there's a premise, if you will, there's a hypothesis, I'll say that again, that pharma may end up completely rethinking their operating model, meaning that they'll become highly specialized. You'll have a subset of pharma that does nothing but research and development, and they can expedite, right? And they can effectuate, their science models that can move product through pipe faster, right? So they're going to be that sort of that pipeline, or that machine that produces product. And then you got the second aspect of that, which is commercial, right? So once they've moved through pipe, you have a highly specialized function. Now we have those today, but we're talking about the possibility whether you have two distinct industries, where you have drug development in one silo and commercialization in the other, all driven by AI, right? And making both stronger, faster, better. So that's the concepts I keep hearing often. From a functional perspective, I mean, I think the possibilities are obvious, right? It's all about operational efficiency, speed, right? And those concepts that we're all very familiar with. So just to close the loop, close the loop on vertical, to say that we built 5 generations of fairly complex software, raised a lot of capital. And I think after 4 years, we had 40 to 50 global pharma clients on our platform, engaging in the iPad, of course. And every time they used the iPad, they went out and bought 1,000 of them for their sales force. But at the end of the day, we were able to, I think we identified a need, and the need was to be able to distill that content. And again, back then, the digitalization of content was fairly new, right? I don't know, probably rudimentary as well. But we were able to take that and create that experience, and give the executives, the leaders, insight they had never had at a speed at which they never have imagined, in terms of understanding content, applying the content, learning from that, whatever that might be. And that distills down into, it was a big data play, right? We were able to, in real time, let marketing leaders understand that they were on task, on time, on tempo, as it relates to message or brand execution, right? And we were able to, operationally enable the pharma companies to create what we call, again, thin apps. They became like app factories, and they could do that at a very rapid level. Today, it's very easy. Back then, it wasn't so easy.
Yeah. No, I was just recently talking to someone, even about, LLMs, right? Like Gen AI, like which has now become like that's common terminology. Everyone's talking about it, right? But
Yeah.
even like at the tail end of when I was at Axtria, we were trying to build something that would be field intelligence, which would be so much easier today with like, with LLMs, and reporting is such a common use case that LLMs are applied to, and just in time, on demand insights, and so on. Those are like typical use cases that we
Yeah.
see, but we were trying to build field intelligence then. I'm sure our former company has pivoted and is capitalizing on it, because
I'm
they
sure.
were talking AI way before it became sexy, right?
Yeah.
Data and AI. So I'm sure they're doing it. All right. So let's go back to, so through your entrepreneurial experience and also now in being in pharma, what are some key metrics you track to determine success with products?
Great question. Because when I first started, I had no idea, right? And it's through hook or crook you figure it out. But I'd put it, Smith. I'd probably put it in three buckets, right? The first one is if you build it, will they come, right? Adoption, activation. Can you get people to sign up, right?
Yep. Yep.
Are you generating the aha moment where whatever your product feature set offers resonates, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then you measure that obviously through the signups, new users, right? Activation rates, and then you look at metrics like time to value. Are folks really engaged? Are they using the platform? That's always for me. It's that's the moment, right? I feel like the whole user acquisition. I wouldn't say it's easy, right? Because every single product has its own complexities. But when you start to engage users, you start to bring users on board onto platform. That's great, and that's certainly sort of the first hurdle, if you will. I think the most significant one that I've always looked at is, how much time on platform, right?
Yeah.
And not only time, but where's their focus on platform? Is there a hyper focus around a certain set of features, right? And let's look at that. Have there been some features that are just orphaned and are underutilized? And that gives you sort of from a product development, product roadmap perspective, it gives you some, at least directionally, some data
Yeah.
points to let you know that, hey, this is something we have to think about, right? We were over leveraged in a certain, feature that otherwise is useless. Or when I say useless, just not resonating. You're not creating that aha moment, right? So that's one. The whole adoption sort of activation, bucket, and then you have, we're kind of swerved into it, but the whole engagement, right? Engagement for not for engagement's sake, but are you retaining, right? Are you maintaining your user base? Do you have a low churn, right? And what's that daily or monthly, the down, the MAU, if you're familiar with that daily
Mhm.
activity. Yeah, right. You're looking at the activity, and that really is for me. That's where I get excited when I'm looking at products to understand that yes, they're on, but man, they are engaged, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
got a high intention rate, depending on whatever timeline you want to look at. Sometimes day one, right? You got repeat utilization, and then like I said before, the sort of that feature adoption. How are folks behaving when they're on platform? And then finally, and I spent 17 years in Kentucky, so I'm authorized to say this. There's an old colloquialism: if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right?
Yep.
So, what's your growth look like? What's your monetization models look like? Are we growing efficiently? Are we scaling toward profit? Right. And then that obviously, you drill down into the whole, how much are we spending to get what we got, right? The whole customer acquisition cost, customer lifetime value. You look at the CAC and LTV ratios. What is our level of investment? And are we gaining efficiency over time and creating a better model in terms of the ratios? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
those are sort of the three things. So, adoption, engagement, and obviously growth that I look at as
Yeah.
far as,
Absolutely.
if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally makes sense. And, over time, I think software has also gotten sophisticated in integrating different tools like Pendo, or like, at the very basic level, you have Google Analytics, you have Amplitude, and platforms like that that'll tell you which page did they land on, how did they navigate, what how much time did they spend on different things. And then Pendo gets into like precise, did they click on a button, right? And hopefully if we've done enough user experience research and user experience design up front,
Yeah.
all of these trend in the right direction and you don't have those abandoned features, right? But it's always good to kind of do that upfront and then also track the metrics, because that way you course correct, or don't keep investing in something that either the market changed or the user, how they think about it changed, and no need to invest in that anymore.
Yeah, to me, I mean, the best metrics tell a story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that story is, are we truly solving a problem? And you know this better than anyone, Smitha. You see that in the data, right? When you analyze that data, you do see it, and then you understand. Okay, they're going to keep coming back for these reasons. We're able to scale in a healthy way, an efficient way, right?
Yeah.
At the end, that's the signal you're looking for. I'm always careful not to fall in love with my own data, right? What they say, the vanity metrics, right?
Yep. Yep.
Be careful with vanity metrics. It's really about the signal, right? And your customer, your consumer, your user. Certainly if you're paying attention, if you've got the right constructs to measure that, it'll tell you a compelling story, and it'll educate you pretty quickly, right? And now you just have to be pliable enough to listen to it and pivot if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as an entrepreneur, you'll really pay attention to the metrics because it's kind of your business. It's kind of what you do, right? I think too often, you're right. Actually, I had one guest on this podcast series. He's the first one who used the term vanity metrics. I had actually not heard that term before. And it's all the cool, oh, what's your NPV? No, sorry, NPS score, not NPV, NPS score, and your CSAT, like, all those external nice looking metrics. But at the end of the day, like I was explaining when I think I'd gone bring a parent to school, one of the, like, talk about your profession. I had to explain product management to elementary school kids. And I actually had so much fun. The kids asked me some really great questions. This was years ago. My kids are, as you know, I'm about to be an empty nester. But at the basic level, you want to build a product that is solving a problem that someone will use and is willing to pay money for it.
Yep.
Simple.
Yeah.
It's very simple, right? And that's kind of what these real metrics are about, right?
Yep.
Is someone paying? So is your growth rate that way, not like this way? And are they using it? So what's the stickiness with the product? Where are they spending the time? Or are they just lost and they abandon? That tells me my UX design didn't work or the workflow didn't work. There's so many things you get out of it if you follow some basic, simple principles as you're building products. So
100%. Again, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right?
yeah, you're right.
You're probably making sense. You're probably making sense.
That's awesome. All right. So in your career across all these different all these different companies you worked at and your own venture, what was the biggest challenge you've faced with products, and what would you do differently if you could have a do-over?
It's just a 5-part series, or because I spend hours. Every time I think about what I would do differently, right? There was a great quote by Richard Branson one time. It was complexity is your enemy. Any fool can create something complicated. It's hard to keep things simple, right? Mm. And I always love that quote because I was always guilty of over engineering things and overthinking product, and not thinking about just the point you just made perfectly is, are we solving a real problem? Are we solving the wrong problem, right? Are we falling in love with our features instead of our customers' pain, right? Yeah. those are concepts that cost me a whole lot of time, energy, money, and tears to figure out that, to your point, it's not that complex, right? To Richard Branson's statement, it's easy to create complexity. It's a simplicity you gotta fall in love with, and sometimes it's really simple to get to the heart of the matter, right, for a client. So I would say number one is be very mindful of what problem are you truly solving, and if you're going down the investment route, right, that's the first question they ask you. That's the first slide they want to see. What's the problem you're solving, right? And again, just trying to stay away from over engineering something, overthinking something, and falling in love with that possibility versus falling in love with the that whole gap, right? No gap, no solution, right? So that's one thing, is keeping sort of a wide open mind around, or hyper focus. I should say, not wide open mind, hyper focus in around that pain point. What am I really doing here, right? What's that problem, right? The other thing is then, sort of dovetailing away off that point is, if you validate it, and if you see a clear path to pain and a clear path to aligning a solution to that pain, be careful about over engineering that solution, right? And spending months of your time and in some cases millions of dollars, right, trying to over engineer and solve for that problem. Sometimes it, again, the solution can be
Get early feedback. Get early feedback.
exactly.
And sometimes, so I think it's actually a very important point you're making. Sometimes customers, especially if you're creating a new market which doesn't exist, so there's nothing to compare,
Yep.
to get customers to understand that sometimes can be challenging because they're like, well, do I really need that? I don't know. Right? But if you can connect it back to, hey, imagine if you could do whatever you're doing in a much better way, or, just relate it back to them, because at the end of the day, you need them to say, yeah, I really, really, really need this product and I'm willing to pay for it. Right. So yeah, absolutely right. I think
What is it? Product development 101, product market fit, right? Understand your product market fit, and maybe look at, there's some sort of pain points around the edges you can explore at a later date. But last thing I'd say about that is that as you think through that, and I love the fact that you said client advisory, right? You want to bring those folks in. Again, a lot of quotes here, but I love the quote: "Don't let boardroom assumptions become real world realities." Right? You have to step out of your own way, out of your own office, out of your own sort of incubator, and talk to those clients, talk to those users, talk to those folks that you're trying to solve that problem for, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing, which I'm so guilty of this one. I always, and I'm doing it right now. As a matter of fact, I'm working on a fairly significant product play right now, and I bristle at MVP. And I always think an MVP is just not enough. I want to go with the whole product. I want the whole platform. Because it's going to cost me at some point. I've changed my thinking on that, right? But MVP can be a hard thing to do as a sort of a CEO founder or someone leading product. Those sort of iterative steps. Sometimes you feel like you're not making great time, but you might be lost, right? So.
Yeah.
Does that help? That makes sense?
That's really, I think that's a very different perspective than what I've heard from other guests, because that's a decision like product managers make all the time.
Yeah.
Because there's countless things you can do with a product.
Yeah.
But how do you prune it down to the minimum set that will actually be useful, will actually solve a problem before you go with all the rest of the bells and whistles that you want to add to it? So that's, and by the way, I just want to make one point on the product market fit. Too many entrepreneurs and too many founders think that's like a one-time event. It's not a one-time event.
Absolutely.
Because the market doesn't stay stationary. Your competitors are not staying stationary.
Right.
As a product manager early in my career, my biggest learning was how you thought the product was going to be used and how customers actually used it,
Yep.
right? So you're kind of like, wait, what happened there? But that's why, because we used to build in the waterfall methodology
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you
Yep.
created all these requirements at point n equals 1, t equals 1, whatever, and then t equals 12 a year later or whatever, you had the product in a beta. And by then, so many things had changed that what would have been a product market fit at n equals 1 was no longer just a product market fit at n equals 12, which is why Agile gives us the ability to continuously iterate.
Yep.
That said, for founders, my advice, what I give people is look for that PMF just to get your MVP out, get your foot in the door, start to build that traction in the market, but continuously assess whether you still have PMF, because that can keep changing.
Yep. I
That
love
can
it.
keep changing.
Yep, I agree. And then my sort of thinking has morphed over time, evolved over time on that. And again, the MVP thing, it only scares me because I always want to go fast, right?
Yeah.
Right. But the concern is, again, you've over-engineered it, you've under-validated it, and you've got a problem. Now you have a bigger gap, bigger problem to solve for internally, right?
Yeah.
We're MVPs, to your point, and very much to your point around sort of get that user feedback. The MVPs will give you validation, allow you to pressure test some assumptions, evolve, in that sort of, and again, I'll use the sprint mentality, right? Pretty quickly.
Yep.
And last thing I'll say about that in terms of, sorry to cut you off, but
Sure.
yeah, the last thing, not last thing, but one of the other things I've experienced over time is that roadmap, right? We often talk about that. For me, that's the North Star. That's the ground piece, right? If you establish a validated roadmap, and some of it can be validated, some can be aspirational, but I love the idea of thinking, not over engineering, but thinking through Stephen Covey, the end in mind, right? What does your product ultimately look like, and what does it ultimately serve or do or fix, right? And how through technology are you going to enable that solution? And thinking through all that is a great exercise. I'm sure all the folks who would hear this do, but I like to use the roadmap as a way to control the chaos, right?
Yeah.
And again, you got to be flexible, pliable, but for me, if you don't put some forethought into that roadmap, and you have sort of that sequential development cycle that says here's our iterations, right? Here's what we're going to go through. Here's iterations and generations of product. You do get chaos, and I can tell you, having built much product for clients, right, business, in multiple businesses, if you'll get pulled in a million different directions, right?
Mhm.
Everything. What's that saying? If everything's a priority, nothing is. Be very careful.
Exactly.
Be very mindful about your product priority, your roadmap, and use that. And let that be your North Star. Let that, frankly, be your guardrails or your discipline, right? That keeps you focused. That'd be my last point about
Yeah, but actually, it was a perfect dovetail into my next question, which is a special topic. So the special topic I have is I'm going to give you a choice of which one you want to talk about. Either leadership in chaos or being an ally. Which topic do you want to talk about?
Oh my God.
So I usually, for my female guests, I usually ask them about being a woman in tech or leadership or whatever. But that the corollary to that is being an ally. So that or leadership in chaos, both are juicy topics. So
Yeah, they
whichever
really
one
are.
you want.
Yeah, I like being an ally, right? Leadership in chaos is, it's a layup, but being an ally is, and again, how do you want to approach that? Let me just give you my opinion on that now that
Yes,
worked for me.
please.
Yeah. And again, we often say, if you're in the consultant business, you're hopeful, you hope to be a trusted ally, right? A trusted advisor. That is sort of point one, and it goes back to our very first question. If you're not truly trying to solve for a problem, you're truly not investing time, energy, and effort into engaging, right, with your constituency, i.e., your client and or user, then you will fail, right? And or maybe not fail. I mean, that's a little harsh. Maybe it'll be challenging.
Yep.
for me, it's the deeper, what's that? Seek first to understand, then to be understood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That is really the essence of, if I can sort of characterize my career, as successful, that's what I've done well, is really attempting to dig down into that, to understand true pain points, not just at the superficial level, right? And I've developed an entire framework, as a matter of fact, to sort of, about 14 different levels to really dig into understanding, if you're going to be a true ally, you've got to understand the impact or consequence of a particular problem and or gap or business need, right? And you need to drill deeply into that to understand what's the net effect of either fixing it, solving for it, or not, right? And then let's take another level and say, well, what does that mean then, right? Either by not solving for it, or by having a successful resolution to whether those gaps are. So I've created, and again, frameworks, processes to really dig deep into that. And sometimes it seems painful, but I don't do anything until I do, a pre-discovery and discovery call with my clients, and that I can then articulate back to them with absolute clarity, right? In terms of what the problem is and the reasons that we're sitting here, and the reason you should believe that I have a solution to the problem we've identified with clarity, right? So that's in terms of that's my own philosophy, if you will, in terms of how to become a true ally, or a trusted advisor.
Love it. Love it. Great insights. Oh my God, that was really good. And that framework, is that a framework that you leverage in CWC?
Exactly
Okay.
right. Yep, exactly right. And it's something that I provide for my clients, right? They can repurpose that, to their own benefit. So yeah. But it gets us down into, what it does is I characterize. I always say, if I can't speak your tribal language, you're never going to understand me, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't articulate crisply and concisely and clearly what your problem is, we have a problem, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I can't.
Because then you're shooting in the dark. You don't know what you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I can't surf it if, again, no gap, no solution,
Yeah.
right? And we've got to identify that gap, and how wide is that gap, right?
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Almost time for the fun question, which is any book recommendations that you have for our audience. It could be related to products, not related to products, whatever you wish to share.
Oh my God, I'm looking to the right because all my books are over there. And my wife says I don't read enough fun books. I read a ton of business books, but there are a ton of them. One I really like and matter of fact, it actually was a perfect dovetail into my last point in terms of frameworks and creating motions that are predictable, sustainable, and scalable over time, right? So there's a book by Aaron Ross, Predictable. Aaron Ross was the former head of outbound sales at Salesforce, right? And he grew Salesforce by 100 million, and he did it through scalable, predictable models, right? I call it sales motion. He refers to it as the sales engine, right? And it taught me so much. But it really taught me was how do you identify, or how to define your ICP, your ideal customer profile, right?
Yeah.
And all the levels that you need to think about in terms of having a total sense of clarity as to who that persona is, right? What the possibilities are and needs around that persona, right? And what type of narrative or messaging or value do you provide to that particular persona, right? And that's on sort of when you have that precious moment in time, right? With a client where you're looking to surface a possibility, what we call a fit, right? Are our companies a fit? And then, you back that up a little bit. What he also taught me was in terms of how to think about my sales funnel, right? And how I think about the way I support that, right? And service that model, right? Meaning that, it's not one dimensional. You have inbound expertise, you have outbound expertise, and you have closers, right? So, and again, when you look at the sort of the composition of your sales force, that I learned a great deal from that particular book for that one. So that was Predictable by Aaron Ross.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually well worth the read because he did it. It's all about practical application, which I love.
I love those kind of books. Yeah.
I spent 10 years in the Army, and every time they taught you, they'd always say, we're going to give you an explanation, a demonstration, and a practical application of how to do this, right? And it's a
Yeah.
great way to learn, and I felt like that book was speaking my language. And then the next one, more I think pursuant to this point or this topic, is inspired by Marty Kagan.
Yeah.
You know, and that was much of what I articulated here today.
Yeah.
And really just great products, solve great problems.
Yeah.
Right. And that they just thought that was awesome. You focus on the problem, not the feature. And then as long as it's kind of like in healthcare, we always say the patient's at the center, right?
Yeah.
In product development, it's got to be the problem is at the center. And if you can hyper focus on that and be transfixed on the problem, everything else will make sense in terms of the solution.
Yeah.
So
Great recommendations. No, thank you. Appreciate that so much, and appreciate having you on. It's been an absolute pleasure recording with you and learning. I mean, your varied history as as a veteran, as an entrepreneur, and I just knew a sliver of your background when we worked together, and I'm really thankful we've stayed in touch, and we've learned more about each other and what we have to offer. So Carl, really appreciate you being on, and for our audience, thank you for listening in. Please drop any comments you may have when this recording posts. Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it so much. Thanks for being on the show.
It was awesome.
Thank you.